Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sunday School Dropouts podcast. This is another one of our VBS episodes, and I'm really excited about everything that we get to share with you guys today. So, First things first, what are some announcements that we have, Laura?
Well, hello, everybody. We've got some great announcements for you today. Back by popular demand, the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery has some fall support groups, which I'm so excited for because we have 5 different groups coming this fall, and you can sign up for them now. Signups are currently open and available. I'm thrilled at the variety of groups we have, everything from working with your inner child, finding your voice, feeling resourced, purity culture, and none other than Pastor Andrew is going to be leading a group for former and deconstructing Seventh-day Adventists. And I'm just so excited about all the different groups that are being offered, and thrilled that you are leading one too this fall. Yeah, so if you're interested in signing up, go to traumaresolutionandrecovery.com, click the services button. There's a thing for support groups right there. You can read more about them. You can sign up. Groups will begin mid-September to October, and it'll just be like a really nice way to be supported in a variety of different areas pertaining to faith deconstruction and religious trauma. And as you know, we also have our religious trauma and the elections course, where we've been going all year. It's a self-led course, so you can hop in at any time and you'll still have access to all of the course material, not telling you how to vote, who to vote for, the ins and outs of different legislation, but it's a way to help you find a sense of support, stability, safety, in the midst of what is turning out to be a very eventful election cycle. So you can go to, again, the traumaresolutionandrecovery.com website, click courses, and use the code Sunday School Dropouts to get a discounted price. So that is our announcement. Andrew, who are we inviting back into the VBS sphere to finish us out?
I'm definitely very excited. So we are excited today to welcome back April LaJoy and Beecher Reuning. April and Beecher were on the Sunday School Dropouts podcast in our first season, talking about the experience of dating and getting married in purity culture, their process of deconstruction, and their process of individual and relational healing. It was an amazing episode, and if you haven't listened to it, you'll want to.
Yes, and if you want to hear more of their story, you can listen to them on their podcast, which is the Non-Binary Marriage Podcast, and they are on every platform that you listen to podcasts on. You can also follow April and her amazing, witty, and dare we say, convicting content across all platforms at April a Joy, and listen to her every week on the New Evangelicals Weekly Recap podcast.
April has a book coming out that is available for pre-order called Star-Spangled Jesus. April's book explores how the fight to make America a Christian nation has damaged us all, and shows how she left Christian nationalism and why America should too. Star-Spangled Jesus is available for pre-order, including Audible.
Yes. And Beecher is a non-binary filmmaker and professor who used evangelical culture to hide their gender identity for most of their life. You can follow Beecher across all social media platforms at Hello Beecher.
A couple months ago, we asked April and Beecher if they wanted to join us on our VBS field trip to the Ark Encounter in Williamstown, Kentucky, and they were both on board. So we spent the day with them, wandering through the Ark, listening to Ken Hamm speak, and navigating a lot of "whoa, we can't believe we believed that" moments. We are excited for y'all to hear a little bit more about that trip, as well as our thoughts as we took a deep dive into the story of Noah.
Yes, and this is what we've been teasing for the last couple months, is that we definitely went on this field trip to the Ark Encounter because we knew we were talking Vacation Bible School, and you've got to have the hands-on experiences. So, yeah, Andrew, what did you think of the Ark? I know we'll talk about it more when April and Beecher join us, but what were your thoughts?
Yeah. Honestly, it was the art. It's actually very, what's the word? imposing the ark. It's built to scale. It's huge. It's actually, I will actually give them credit in that it's impressive. You can see it from the parking lot when you first pull in. It's maybe, I don't know, a quarter mile, half a mile from the parking lot, where the shuttle buses take you closer to it, and it's huge. It kind of dominates the landscape. It's impressive.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't at first I was like, oh, it's literally just this ark that's in the middle of a field, which it is.
Yeah, it is.
But then they also have it really is more like theme park, where they have these different things. They've got food to eat there. They've got a zip line that you can do. They have a zoo with real kangaroos in it, which I was so bummed we didn't get to. There's with the kangaroos, you can go in and walk around and stuff. And we got there too late to be able to do that. But the kangaroos looked very sad. And I have to believe it's because they know that they're at an Ark Encounter zoo and not a real zoo. But yeah, they had that. They had a virtual reality center. They had the Answers in Genesis, or what is called the Truth Center or Answers Center or something like that. There's
something to that effect.
a lot of different things that you could do there. And a ginormous gift shop that was absolutely culturally appropriating so many things. Except for the fudge. That looked really good. And that was true to Kentucky.
Yeah. I do think that might have been local. I don't know, but
yeah,
it did smell good.
So too. They made it right there on at the premises. But yeah, it was a sight to behold. And then, as you'll hear in our recap with April and Beecher, it took a lot out of us emotionally and physically.
Yeah, it really did. And we'll of course get into that more, but just to say, it's having been out of that world for quite a few years, it was very interesting going back to a space like that, because it's absolutely the kind of place that back when, I was a kid going to VBS or was homeschooled, that's the kind of place we would have gone, and it was really, it was a very interesting experience stepping back into that world after having been out of it for so long.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know I talk a little bit more about this, in our talk with April and Beecher, but I think sometimes when I enter into those situations, I'm always a little skeptical of is this going to make me question my choices again? Is it going to make me re-up some old fears of what if I'm wrong or, whatever. And I was really pleasantly surprised that that did not happen at all. I felt like I walked out of that experience just as, confident of what my deconstruction process, my healing process, and then also just having more, because of the way it impacted me physiologically, even being in those spaces really gave me a lot of insight onto, wow, that's probably how I felt so much of my life prior to coming out of all of it, deconstructing and working through religious trauma. And that brings a sense of grief and relief, of course, because I'm not in it, but there is a heavy sense of grief where I'm like, wow, I just, I need to be really kind to my younger self, that there was a heaviness that she had on her for quite some time.
Yeah, it was, I agree completely. It was a lot.
Yeah. Well, we will get into that, but I think before we do that, I think we should, gossip a little. What do you think?
Oh, yes, absolutely. All right. So today I would like to spend some time talking about the opening ceremony of the Olympics. I don't know if y'all got a chance to see that, but it was all over my Facebook feed. Did you guys?
Yeah.
Facebook feed? Is that because you're 80 and you are only on Facebook?
It's not because I'm 80, but a lot of, the older relatives who were up in arms about, this godless portrayal of all the things exists mostly on Facebook. At least in my world it does. Maybe that's because my Instagram is a little more curated, but the conservative relatives are all on Facebook, so...
I mean, it was clearly blasphemy because like everybody knows, the famous blue guy on a plate that was in Da Vinci's Last Supper painting was just obviously taken to extreme heights. Like, you're not that blue guy really made it clearly about Jesus and American Christianity.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I was driving home during the opening ceremony, so I had to watch it later. But I was confused because I was like, wait a second, am I missing something here? Like, I swear that is not the Last Supper for so many reasons, right? But like, these Christians are all up in arms and they just love their persecution. Mm-hmm. They love that persecution complex. They just love to like bathe in it. And so it's the perfect opportunity for, you know, end of times rhetoric, mockery, slander.
Oh yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the Last Supper, which is what most people got up in arms about. Which, even if it was the Last Supper, which it wasn't, but even if it was, literally so many different types of art have impersonated the Last Supper, and also the Last Supper painting is not biblical canon.
Yeah, or accurate.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the disciples weren't white.
Yeah, and Jesus wasn't white either.
Jesus wasn't white, yeah.
And then, of course, when the horse and the rider came down the center of
the pale horse of Revelation.
Yeah, it was a silver horse, but if you look at it kind of squinting, it's pale and it's white, and that is the horse of Revelation. That's right. John, when he was exiled and he had visions of Revelation, he was picturing the 2024 opening ceremonies. That's what
right.
Lucky.
That's the moment.
That wasn't the only thing either. There was a golden bull head at the opening ceremony too, that a lot of people said was clear worship of Baal or Baal, which I've heard more people say Baal, but I always grew up and the pastor said Baal.
That's what I heard or thought too.
I always heard Baal too, but
I had some like Theo bro that was like, actually it's Baal. I'm like, okay, whatever. But anyway, they were mad about that too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's like clockwork so much, like the halftime shows and the opening ceremonies. Yeah. Like, I really want to talk to a Christian before that's in that world and be like, are you going to watch it? And are you just looking for something to complain about? Because why are you watching it? You know that you're going to hate it. Is it like, do they feel like, well, this is my duty. I have to watch it. And I've got to get on Facebook. And Facebook is where I saw it too. Because that's where I still have all those. I don't know why it shows up, but that's where I see it too. I don't get it. It's wild.
Also, there's some uproar about the closing ceremony that just happened recently.
I saw that.
That they claimed the little... I thought he looked like a gold bug or a golden Edward Scissorhands coming down from the ceiling. I jokingly, I made a joke that said, oh, look, that's, you know, Satan when he rebelled against God and was cast out of heaven. It's like the fallen angel, as a joke. But that's actually literally what people are saying, that it was a satanic ritual and they were celebrating the fallen angels and the demons below in the little...
Oh my God.
Like, it's so true though. Like, if you look for Satan in everything, you can find Satan. Like, you see what you want to see, and clearly these people want to be pressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think too, it's just wild because like the United States got the most medals by any country ever. This should be a moment that for people that are very patriotic should be saying, wow, see, they say all the time, we live in the greatest country on earth. America's the greatest. America's greatest. But now that we're getting the most medals, they're mad about the opening and closing ceremonies or certain boxers from other countries, or they're mad about things. And I think a piece of it might be that I think the Olympics, when you look at all the different athletes, it is America. It's people of all different shapes and sizes. It's all different colored skin. It's all different viewpoints. And I think that triggers people. So I think they turn on possibly to go, yeah, America's the best and I want to see. But then they look and go, wait, these people don't represent America. They're not white and wearing a MAGA hat. And then they can't complain about that because that's too openly Well, I mean, some of them do. They're just openly racist. But the ones that don't do that have to look for something else. And so then they just pick apart absolutely everything else they can and claim persecution. And I'm like, y'all, you're supposed to be the patriotic ones. You're the ones with 18 American flags. Why are you not celebrating this?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like American evangelical. I saw this joke. Somebody made it, probably on Instagram, not Facebook. But anyway, about American evangelicalism feeling like it always needs to be the main character in everything. And it's like so true, because it's like the lens through which they view the world is they being the main character in everything. And it's just like, this has nothing to do with you. No one's trying to persecute you. Nobody cares. And it's so interesting when this is just an interesting piece, just getting outside of the country to like Europe or Australia or wherever, even with other folks who are Christians. It's like American evangelicalism is such a unique beast. Like it's uniquely American. It is so uniquely American. And yet it's like they have no idea. They have no conception of that.
It was this calendar year that I found out that other religions don't evangelize. Like, American evangelicalism is like the only faith system that evangelizes. And it is so, I mean, I feel like that is like coming out strong, because it's like, well, you're clearly persecuting us then, you know, for our faith, because we think we are the only religion that believes that our religion should be your religion. And so therefore everything is seen through that lens, and they can't not make it about themselves. It has to be about themselves, and then ultimately their own persecution, because it also furthers their narrative that then, you know, Jesus is coming back sooner. See, we're persecuted. It means we're doing something right. And just, gross.
Someone left a comment on my Facebook page, back on Facebook. There's some cool people on Facebook. I do technically have a page on there. But someone said that the term should be purse-offended, because they're not
Yes.
I was like, I like that. I'm going to start using that.
Yeah. Yeah. And like self-inflicted purse-offended.
Yeah. There's like that meme of a kid hitting him, like, where if you zoom in, it looks like the foot's on the kid's face and like he's being squished. But when you zoom out, he's got his arm in the shoe himself and he's kicking him. He's like holding himself down like that. That is American evangelicalism. They are hitting themselves in the head with the shoe and claiming that someone else is doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and okay, I mean, we kind of like mentioned it, but like, can we talk about the fact that there's all this uproar around it's actually two different boxers, and the elevation of that, or it's not even an argument, it's whatever, but like their failure to talk about how a convicted rapist was on a volleyball team, just doing whatever he wanted to do, you know, getting zero attention, but then they're going to make these like fake accusations and cause this enormous amount of chaos over this woman who is not fitting the stereotype of what they think a woman should look like. It just, it's so gross.
When all of that broke out about the two women boxers, I went on my Facebook because I was like, I know I'm going to know people that have posted some stuff. And so I went like, I kind of like, I can engage with the Facebook comments every once in a while when I feel like I've got a purpose for it, like I'm going to do some good. And so I was like going through and like correcting my cousins and the guy that officiated our wedding. Like I was going through like, hey, this isn't true. Hey, this isn't true. Hey, this isn't true. And actually 2 or 3 people did redact it, but they're like, well, then what's everyone making a big deal about it for? There's got to be something. And I'm like, that's cyclical thinking. Like you, and then he's like, well, where do I find it? I'm like, Google, just Google it for like 5 minutes and you'll get everything you need to know. And so I will say at least 2 of the people that I confronted did take it down. But I'm like, the same generation that was like taught us, like, don't trust what you see online and be careful, are just like posting things without even just Google it.
Without
like,
any sort of research.
I'm not saying you have to go to MSNBC for the news on it. Go anywhere. Like nowhere is saying that these 2 women are trans or men. Like
except for Fox News.
But even they didn't say it, did they?
I saw, well, I can't verify it, but someone had a screenshot of, or maybe it was a clip from Fox News when the headline on the actual news channel, like the TV station, where they said they called Iman a man, said male boxer. Yeah. It's interesting to me though, a lot of these same people, one, they've doubled down when presented with the facts, which is a whole other problem. But a lot of them, interestingly, will say there's only two genders, right? Male and female. Now I'm seeing the argument that even though they're admitting that Iman has the right, quote unquote, biology, that the chromosomes, which is also not provable because it came from a Russian organization that proved that, but that's still like unfounded. But now they're running with like, they had XY chromosomes, and now they're saying that proves she's not fully a woman. Like, pick a damn struggle.
Yeah.
Like, you're almost now arguing for the existence of trans people by admitting that, it's not actually black and white. Like, like they just don't. Oh, it's like the most frustrating thing. Like clearly it's not about facts. They claim it's about facts and black and white thinking, and there's only male and female. And now they've come in contact with a story that does not fit their black and white narrative of what they believe a woman should be, and they are just doubling down, and they're just using now a lie, which many of them know and have been presented with the actual truth, but they're running with this lie as an excuse to just hate on trans people and to be transphobic, which just shows you at the end of the day, it's not actually about quote unquote biblical truth. It's just about keeping people in their patriarchal ideas of what gender should be and what a woman should be and how men should be. And it's just very much upholding the patriarchy, and it goes against all sorts of actual facts.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so remarkable.
That's like a sermon.
Yeah. It's so remarkable because, like, what this story I think really showed me is how it's like the people who want to take it and run with it do not give a damn about the evidence, because it's like, literally was having conversations with folks where it's like, okay, what you're saying it's patently false, and here you go. Even the sources that you trust aren't not actually explicitly saying what it is you're now saying. Go look it up. And and then when you would pin them on that, they would just kind of like, well, okay, maybe that got blown out of proportion, but the trans movement is still problematic, and then they would just go off on transphobia, and it's just like, okay, but I'm calling you out on the fact that you're spreading misinformation and saying something that's not true. That's what I'm talking about. Stop changing the subject. But it's like some people, they don't care, and it's like it's not about. It's so ironic because they kept thinking of this that saying, the facts don't care about your feelings crap that Ben Shapiro says, and yet these same folks, it's like you hit them back with that, and they are the most offended and whiniest. I don't know. It was astounding to me. Not surprising, but astounding.
And it's one thing for the people we know on Facebook to do it, but for the fact that like J.K. Rowling is doing it and other big names, and they're not retracting it, they're not apologizing, I'm just like,
at least as of this recording. Although Iman said she's coming back with legal action, and
I'm
so glad
she sues the crap out of these people.
I hope she goes after J.K. because I mean, what she's doing is, I mean, that's her whole platform now. Is just transphobia, and even when there's nothing to do with transgenderism in a case, she's using it to throw stones. It's wild.
Awful. Yeah. Well, speaking of another person who's throwing stones, what are your thoughts on Mr. JD Vance, the Republican VP candidate?
I think he's weird. Isn't that what the kids are saying these days?
I think the kids are saying that. Ooh, weird. Yeah.
What an odd guy.
The best thing that I've heard, and I really like this take, is if you compare JD Vance to Mike Pence. Mike Pence understood the assignment in 2016. Be white bread boring and just explain away all of Trump's weirdness as logically, insanely as possible. And I don't know if Trump obviously Trump didn't like that pick because he tried to have Pence killed, or at least was okay with him being killed.
Well, he didn't try.
He was okay with it.
He didn't stop it.
He was okay. He was chill about it. I think from that, I think he said, well, I need to pick a VP that doesn't really have any sense of conscience, even if Mike Pence's is warped. I think he wanted to pick somebody that was like Trump. But now JD Vance is going out and making Trump just look even weirder and crazier, because he's going out and making even weirder and crazier statements and moves. And do y'all see the rally where it's supposed to say Kamala Chaos behind him, and it just said Kamala?
Well,
because
no.
everyone
When
was
the people
standing
stood up, yeah, it looked like he was campaigning for Kamala.
It was.
I saw a CNN. I think it was on CNN. They had like their political analysis or analysts, whatever. And they were saying how kind of what Beecher was saying, that usually a VP pick, when you have someone like Trump, you pick someone that explains away in a more, like
boring,
political way. Like explains away the crazy things that Trump says. And now you actually have people asking Trump about the crazy things JD Vance is saying, and you're having Trump now explaining away the things that his running mate is saying, and it's supposed to be the reverse, especially when you're Donald Trump. You see the weirdest crap. Trump's going off on electricity and sharks and magnets and water in his rallies, and now he's having to explain JD Vance saying, oh yeah, I know that my wife isn't white, but I love her. The crazy cat lady stuff that he is saying. And that doesn't even count like the couch memes, which I know for legal reason it's not true. Someone made it up. But the couch memes they do bring me a little bit of joy. I can't lie about it.
They do bring me joy, I'll admit that.
Yeah. I will say, like, we have entered an era where I have not been as afraid to be scrolling on different social media apps with dread. I have laughed more than I've laughed for political reasons in the last couple weeks than I have, I think, in my adult life. I'm just I genuinely enjoy seeing what people are saying, because it's so weird. To borrow Tim Walz's phrase.
It's weird, and also the emotional roller coaster that progressives and Democrats we've gone on, because we were at we were at a low point about a month ago when when we met up, and we were like, I wasn't watching the news. I was just like, I can't. Yep. And then it changed, and we just got a glimmer of hope, and we're like, yes, I think Kamala, I think Kamala can. And then just to see her take off, it's very exciting.
I don't know if this is petty or not. I don't think it's petty, but
even if it is,
does JD Vance wear eyeliner?
I mean, he has to, right?
It looks like he does, right?
And a photo came out just yesterday of him in drag when he was at Yale, so. Yeah. I mean, maybe he did it once and was like, this is my thing.
I mean, his eyes pop. I mean, they do. They look good.
Beautiful. But
I've been trying to figure out, I've been looking at pictures of him, and I don't know what condition your eyes would have to have. Is there such a condition where it looks like you just always are wearing eyeliner?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen other people like that just seem to have eyes that pop that way, and I don't know if it's because it's a heavy lash line or something. I'm not sure. I have seen other people like that. Maybe JD got that wonderful gene and is able to do that. I also think that there's probably many politicians that wear a bit of makeup, and his running mate wears a lot of orange bronzer, and maybe
allegedly
allegedly. Yeah, I mean, that line on his neck is pretty severe, but allegedly.
That's how he pans.
True. He puts up a collar on the back of his neck and just has some oranges the front, but maybe that's the new trend is makeup, and great if that's what they want to do. Totally in their party line. Totally in their party line.
The thing that really is weird for me is that between Vance and Trump, if Donald Trump is now suddenly the most rational one in the room, that's one hell of a hard left turn. That is not something that I ever envisioned between him and his running mate. That's I've used the word astounding already, but that is another example of something that is kind of astounding. I don't think I ever thought I would see that.
And Trump is being asked to defend Vance, but oftentimes he's just saying, "Oh, VPs aren't important." I mean, he's like, oh, like literally everyone's trashing JD Vance, including Trump. It's a wild, and of course all the reporters are just trying to give Vance opportunities to appear normal. I don't know if y'all saw where a reporter said, like, okay, like, why would someone want to grab a beer with you? Like, what makes you relatable? And he was like, oh, haha, I do drink beer. And it's just like, what answer is that? Like, yes, I consume human beverages because I am human. It's like, what? Why just answer like normal?
That one time too, he was like, everything's racist these days. I had 2 Diet Mountain Dews yesterday, and I bet they'll say that's racist.
And then nobody laughs. And then the funniest part of it is he goes, I love you guys. And then he keeps going.
Oh my God.
That's the part that does
I
it.
did not realize that.
It is awkward. I kind of feel bad for him in a way, but then I don't, because he also says really terrible things.
And I listened to a New York Times podcast. It's called The Daily, where they interview a former friend of his who's trans.
Yes, that was a good episode.
And I don't feel sorry for him now that after I've heard kind of how he's changed and grifted just for power over the past 6 years. I think he may have been an okay person 6 years ago, and at a certain point he decided
he started off being a never Trumper
because it was right, but I think he shifted for fame and power.
Yeah, to hear their story on that podcast, it was very eye-opening because it seemed like there was a point where he had genuine curiosity about human issues of like, okay, you're a person with a different experience. I want to understand that. And there was this relationship that was built, a friendship. And that is just, it could not be further from the truth now. It's pretty gross.
It's like he's an alien that landed. And at first he was curious about humanity. And then he's like, you know what? No, I want to take it over. And how do I take it over? I'm going to do the way that orange guy's doing it.
One couch at a time. Yeah. All right. Well, that's maybe a good place to land, unless anybody has anything else to add, gossip about, share what the Lord is laying on your heart.
The Lord is laying on my heart. That sounds so cringe. To shamelessly plug my book coming out in October.
Yes, preach.
On October 1st. But, I am being for real, but also.
Yeah.
I do have a book coming out called Star Spangled Jesus about leaving Christian nationalism, and you can pre-order it now wherever books are sold.
And, we've been talking about how evangelical culture is a little weird. This book is amazing, and it goes so much more into crazy stories about April growing up very, very, very hard on the evangelical right. So it's a great read.
Oh, I'm so excited to read it.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I'll definitely get it.
Yeah. So they can buy that wherever books are sold.
Yes.
It's available for pre-order.
Yep, you can pre-order, and then it releases October 1st, and there's also Kindle and audiobook that I read myself.
Nice. Well, we will have to have you back on the pod to talk about that. All right, children, gather around. We are going to be talking about a wonderful Bible story today. That is the story of Noah, which is found in the book of Genesis, and I'm so excited to hear everybody's thoughts about the story of Noah, which is, according to my Bible that's falling apart, Genesis 3-5. And before we get into our amazing experience that we had at the Ark, let's just talk about the story a little bit. And what stands out to you about the story of Noah that maybe didn't stand out to you as a kid?
I think as an adult now who's somewhat deconstructed, just how problematic God kind of seems in the story, that, just genocide of the whole world, if you read it, with a fundamentalist literal interpretation.
Yeah, I think so too. Say more about that if you feel like it.
Oh, well, just the how the humans became wicked is also very vague in the story. And there's a lot of things in the account in Genesis that is left up to the imagination, which we learned in the Ark when they throughout it. They're like, we actually had to make this up because the Bible doesn't actually say. And just how I took it as this literal story, but never thought too hard about the logistics of it all. Because once you do, it kind of falls apart.
Ooh, I agree. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what I know. This is the third VBS episode that we're doing. So we've done like different stories and biblical characters. And I feel like in these conversations, I learned so much more about the stories that I ever did in Bible school or, in the years of ministry that I did, because we're looking at them through a more critical lens. And what we're finding is, very different. Like the whole genocide thing, the whole like murder thing, the whole wiping out the earth thing, and like the actual practical implications of that are so much more, they're just heavier than this fun little Bible story that we were told as kids and growing up. And I know we'll get into that in probably all of our favorite room that we entered in the Ark. But yeah, I agree. It's very different than what I was led to believe as a kid.
On our way to the Ark, we actually took a moment to read through the Noah's Ark story for the first time that we'd done it in years. Yeah. And a couple of things stood out to me. I was surprised that he had to take 7 pairs of clean animals. I thought it was just like 2 of every kind, but no, 7 pairs. And I was like, well, that's going to make it harder for Ken Hamm and his Ark to explain. I thought that was odd. I thought it was odd that it was the first thing he did once they made it to the other side of the flood was sacrifice some of those clean animals, and just thought like, well, can you imagine being one of those clean animals? Like, we made it to be killed. Like, they were just carrying sacrifices.
So close.
So close. Oh.
And probably a more gruesome death too, right? Like, I feel like...
Oh, yeah. I feel like you would drown. I think that's a quicker death, just like than burning alive. Of course, maybe they slit them. Maybe they slit their throat first.
Yeah, Ken didn't talk about that.
Yeah, also vague. No, not specific. Oh, another thing that the scripture said, hold on. Let me see if I can find it. When he sacrifices the clean animals, it says something about how the smell was pleasing to God. Hold on. Let me find this scripture. Where was it?
Notably, too, clean and unclean wasn't delineated until Leviticus. So somehow Noah just knew clean and unclean, but it really hadn't come about until significantly later.
Genesis 8:20. God tells them to come out of the ark now that they've spent, they've done their time and everyone else is dead. It says, then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. That I never noticed before, that the smell of burnt flesh was what was the turning point for God, where he's like, oh, that's good. That's going to make me not kill everybody.
But you have to think, though, God had had 40 days of smelling wet flesh all over the planet. Finally getting some burnt.
Maybe that
Right. Yeah. New scent. Aroma. Yeah. Earthy. Probably smells a lot like, cedar wood or whatever it is, so maybe there was like that smell. I don't know. Andrew, what do you think?
I was just thinking, I guess that explains why he promised he'll never destroy the earth by flood again, but obviously fire, that's a different story. But he likes fire. He's like, yeah, we're going with fire next time.
Yeah.
He's like, I
that is
can
the whole
tolerate
idea of hell, I guess. Maybe that's why he doesn't throw everybody into a giant ocean to drown forever.
Yeah.
I think it's like, what I'm realizing too is like God is pretty vile and sadistic. Like in these accounts, like in July we did the story of Job, and the thing that we kind of came away with was like God's like up there agreeing with the devil, like, yeah, let's mess with this dude, and this is fun. Like we're kind of eating our popcorn, watching and not intervening. And like it's happening. Well, I guess technically Genesis, the flood happened before Job. So Job was not the first time that God messed with people because it was pleasing to him, like also happened back in Genesis. Yeah. And why, like, I just feel like there had to be more ways to get his power across than wiping out the entire world. That doesn't seem like a powerful God. It seems like a very narcissistic or sociopathic God. Yeah. Maybe that's just me.
I think even when I was in evangelical culture, like when I was in it, the Old Testament God was always very problematic to me. And I never could square it with the New Testament one, especially because I was taught that it was all literal. It's like, okay, well, this is the primitive, like people's understanding of God that's a little easier to kind of like understand the account. But if you actually take it as literal, it's like, well, I thought God never changed, but it sure does seem like God has changed a lot. Either or more realistically, people's perception of God changed a lot.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
True.
That's an interesting thing, because you were asking a moment ago about how we perceived these stories when we were kids versus now, and just the difference. And one thing that was interesting is even as a kid, I do remember finding it all problematic, but then also deferring to my parents and the pastor and my grandparents and all of these adults in my life that I trusted who believed it and said it was literal. I'm like, well, they wouldn't lie to me, and they think it's real. They're telling me it's real, so I guess I'll just trust God and trust that when I'm an adult, I'll understand it too. And of course, now I'm an adult and I've deconstructed and I've left completely. But it's like, to be completely honest, like I don't know that I ever really fully bought into this, like this is a good God, and this is like, I saw the problems even as a kid, whether it be the story of the flood with Noah or the story of Abraham and Isaac, that story of being asked to sacrifice your son and being willing to do it, and then the story of Job. And even as a kid, I'm like, actually, I don't know that my perception changed. It's just now I'm an adult and I go back to these spaces and I'm like, oh my God. Like, it's one thing to believe it, see that as a kid, but like to then be an adult and then take your kids back to these places and be instilling these ideas in them. That's what I don't know. It's unfathomable to where I am now.
Yeah. April and Beecher, did either of you take it pretty literally as a kid, like believe it? Because I did. I absolutely didn't question it till I was an adult. Like not even that many years ago, like within the last decade.
Yeah, no, I'm sure I had the thought of how could a good God, kill all those people. But, in Sunday school, or, my dad or whatever spiritual leader was in my life at the time would just always emphasize how evil humans were and that we deserved it. And that we don't understand God's ways. Like, and our idea of what good is not God's idea of good, that, his ways are just above ours. And so even in my own doubts and questions, I just kind of put it on the shelf. It's like, okay, I can, you just have to justify it. And there's this cognitive dissonance that kind of happens, especially in contrast with who Jesus was and how the gospel describes Jesus as the new covenant. I just remember being really thankful, like, oh, I'm so glad that I live in the new covenant and not under God. In the old covenant, we don't have to sacrifice animals and all of that. But yeah, I definitely believed it, literally.
We have 2 daughters, 8 years old and 5 years old, and we've gone to church some, but not a lot. But they know enough that my oldest is starting to ask questions. And they're very logical and practical questions. And as she's asking the questions, I'm remembering that in elementary school, when I came across these odd stories about child sacrifice and Noah's Ark, and I remember the first time I encountered them, I thought they were odd. And I remember being like, this is really, like, this seems like, really? But then as Andrew said, all the adults and all the people around me were like, yeah, like this is. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just believe it. And you kind of just make a choice I made a choice to believe it when I was, 7 or 8. And then once middle school hits and you're going through all this change and all this stuff, and suddenly like your identity's wrapped up in your Christianity, at that point, you just really stuff any doubts down. But so, yeah, I definitely believed it. But I remember being in elementary school, like, okay, I guess I'll believe this, even though this is hitting me as a little bit outlandish. So yeah.
Yeah, I am now thinking about really, I think for me, I mostly dissociated. Like the questions I learned when I was probably like 18 or 19, I was working at a church, well, for several years, but right at the beginning, I was asking the right questions, of course, not having anybody to ask them to, and knowing that if I were to voice my concerns, like that would be the end of my job. I would be excommunicated, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. I just wasn't at a place at 19 years old to be on my own. And so I'm thinking back now, and I'm like, I was asking those questions, but I really just had to kind of like completely fragment that part of myself or dissociate entirely and just say, like what you were saying, April, like, oh, God's ways are higher than our ways. You know, we don't know what, you know, God's definition of good is different or whatever. And I'm seeing that by having to shut that part of my mind down, or that part of me being cut off, and just accepting these answers of like God's ways are not our ways, and essentially abuse and love are the same thing. It absolutely groomed me for abusive relationships, both inside the church and then outside in like a romantic partnership and everything like that. Because these stories that really couldn't have happened were made to be these like unequivocal truths, and like, if you believe Ken Hamm, absolutely central to the gospel, you know? So it's like, you have to believe these if you want salvation.
Yeah. Another part too of the Noah's Ark story that is preached still to this day as this like very literal call is in chapter 9, where God makes the covenant, and it says, then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth, or be fruitful and multiply. And like now there's this call in churches everywhere that it's basically God's will for everybody to be married and have children. But I've never had anybody actually be like, you know, the context of this verse, though, is that there were only 8 people left on earth. So they needed to fill the earth. And that's not, you know, and now we've got billions of people on the planet. And it's just, you know, that's when, you know, cultural context is an important little thing.
April, are you saying you're in favor of childless cat ladies?
I love childless cat ladies. I'm not one, but more power to them.
I'm a childless dog lady, and I thank you for advocating for that. Yeah. But also, like, think about the practical implications of that, because also this was something that I didn't think about until into my adult years, is this idea of being fruitful and multiplying, both in the story of Adam and Eve as well as the story of Noah. Like, we do know how you're quote unquote fruitful and multiplying, right? Because that is what we would call incest today, you know, and there's like no mention of that, just completely glossing over. And I'm like, why is that what we're celebrating? But you know, I guess cultural context, maybe. No, I'm just kidding. It's wild.
I remember asking that when I was a kid. I think I asked my mom. I don't remember for sure, but just, you know, the logical conclusion, I'm like, well, there was nobody else, because I'm going back to like the initial, like, you know, Adam and Eve had Cain, and they had Abel, and they had Seth, and so forth, and I'm like, so who did they have kids with, like, you know? And then like my mom was like, well, you see, I don't remember exactly what. I mean, she told me what it was, like, well, like it would have been their sisters. I'm like, isn't that weird? Even as a little kid, I remember like putting that together, and I'm like, that doesn't seem like, I don't know, something that we celebrate or are in favor of, but yeah.
Or remain free, like legal and free for. No. Yeah. That's lifelong therapy, if you ask me.
Well, the Noah's Ark story says the Nephilim were still on the earth, so I don't know what those are, but maybe if they got tired of their cousins.
True. Wait, so the earth was flooded, but the Nephilim were also there?
Before it flooded. I don't know. It says the Nephilim were still on the earth.
Okay.
And that's why if you saw Russell Crowe's Noah, there were these giant rock creatures, because that was Aronofsky.
Oh. But they could mate with humans and create
I have
children?
no idea. There's one verse that says it, and I have no idea what it means, but it's there, and I didn't really notice, and that's not in the kids' story that I was taught in Sunday school.
Yeah. Well, here's what we have to really find out is Russell Crowe's version of Noah and the Ark and the Nephilim more accurate than Ken Ham's? Because I don't know. I feel like there is a good possibility that it could be more accurate.
I mean, I don't know if you can get less accurate.
True.
I mean, you probably could. I mean, Ken Ham had dinosaurs on his ark, so.
That's true. Baby dinosaurs. You know.
True, but dinosaurs nonetheless.
I mean, maybe that's a good segue into our amazing field trip that we took.
Amazing is a interesting word for that.
Yes. I mean, first of all, are y'all recuperated from it? Are we feeling okay?
I think so. I'm far enough removed now. It took some unwinding for sure.
I had a very reflective weekend. A lot of I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to take a hot bath. I'm going to just sit here and sit quietly and reflect on where I was and what I just experienced and where I am now. But yeah, no, I do feel like I personally bounced back and feel great. But
Yeah. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, I've definitely recuperated. This is a really interesting summer in general this year because this actually marks 10 years since I left the church. I'd really kind of been out even longer, but it was 10 years ago that I started my grad program for clinical counseling, which was what I did instead of going to seminary and starting my MDiv. So it was like a very real trajectory shift summer of 2014. That was also, it was early that year. I actually still remember it was April of 2014 that I just kind of inexplicably stopped reading my Bible that year and literally never went back, even though I fully intended to many times, but never did. And so, yeah, I'm far enough removed from that it's really I'm good and I was fine, but it was interesting stepping back into a space like that, just filled with such over the top language and programming and all these people that fervently believed it, and thought that, and it's just so interesting, even the folks there that worked there, just so how excited they were to see folks there, especially like me with my visible tattoos and piercings, and they're you can tell they're looking at me like a project, oh, we're reaching the world, we're reaching the unsaved of the world, this is so good, God is using us in our ministry. And I remember, because I used to do that, I used to be that person, and so it's I know what it feels like to be on the other side of it. It was a very interesting experience in that regard.
It is a weird moment to be on that side of it, to go into a world where you used to thrive and you understand what they're doing because that was you, but to be on the receiving end of the proselytizing is just a very weird feeling.
But it's like a heightened version of what we were in, because it's like if someone took a theme park of the culture that I was in. I don't know, it was a Disney-fied version of Sunday school, and it was just this is it. It really does, to me now looking back, feel like we were teleported to another planet or another world or another time, like a Doctor Who episode or something. It feels like it was just wild to look around and see all the families and people there, and just they all seemed on the exact same page on things that I'm just you shouldn't all not be on the same page with this, and if you are, it shouldn't be in the way that, I don't know. It was wild.
They were so excited, and the parking lot was full, and that place is expensive. It is not worth the money that they charge, in my personal opinion.
Agreed. Yeah, Beecher, I was similar to you in that it took me the weekend to kind of come back down. And I mean, I knew I was tired just anyways. I mean, we'd been there, we were there, what, 8 hours? I can't remember, on your feet all day, hot weather, and in this ark, and Ken Hamm, it was just no breaks, right? But, and then I had a drive on either side of that. And so on the way home, I was trying to process it. I had a couple friends, Kevin, the podcast editor, we voice message back and forth, and another friend that and so I was trying to download what it was that I had just experienced. And I mean, I kept telling them, like, I don't even know how to process what this is. Got home, went to bed, and was just exhausted on Saturday, which I think was just, physical exhaustion, whatever. But like also just stepping, like you said, stepping back into that world is so, I mean, I don't want to take the line away from you, Beecher, what you were saying at dinner of like kind of that thought process of like the thought process loop of what was happening. But it's a very weird thing to see it from the different perspective. And yeah,
I think being there,
you should explain what the thought process is.
That's what I'm going to try if I can remember it. So you walk in, and my initial thought is, well, the very first thought walking in is actually like, this is kind of cool. It's a giant boat in the middle of the forest. And you're like, this is a technological, like, it cost them $100 million to make. It's the largest, like, freestanding wooden structure in the world.
Huge.
It's huge.
It was very,
it's huge.
I mean, it's impressive when you see it from a distance and like, whoa, that's kind of cool.
And so, so there was a few moments of that. But then once you get past the first floor, you start getting indoctrinated with so many exhibits that are telling you this is exactly the way it is, and down to everything. I mean, there was even, one little depiction of these little mini figures that was depicting an orgy scene about like how people fell into sin. So they like were explaining everything. But
projecting the sin though, because the Bible again doesn't specify.
Right, like metalworking and music.
Right, music and polygamy was one of them.
Yeah.
But you just know a group of teenage boys are just going to hang out at that one scene. No.
Sure, I forgot about the little figurines.
Yeah, it was like,
the orgy figurines.
They explained everything. The fall of man.
Someone spent a lot of time on those women. They were well chiseled.
And they liked it. They liked it.
I think you come across each new exhibit, and my thought process was, at first I laugh because I'm like, this is insane. They're showing like, imagine James Cameron, Avatar, Pandora for what the humanity was like on Earth before the fall. You're just like, this is wild that people are just like buying this 100%. And then you have the thought of like, oh, wait a minute. I used to be in this world, and I used to be one of these people buying it. And then you look around and you see families with kids, and you realize these kids have no choice but to buy it. And so then you get sad with a mix of mad a little bit. And then you just think, but I'm so grateful that I get to go home out of this and that I'm not still in this world. And then you're grateful for a moment. By that point, you're on to the next exhibit and you're laughing again. And it's just this cycle of like laughing, sad, mad, grateful I'm no longer in it. And you just do it on repeat. I mean, for my head, it was on repeat. I'm like, I cannot explain how many emotions I'm feeling, just one after the other, ping-ponging all day. That's one reason I think I was the most exhausted.
And I felt really sad too, seeing all the kids that were there. And like there was that one room that you referenced earlier, Laura, that's they call it Fairy Tale Noah's Ark, and in it you have all of the like children's books and the little Noah's Ark figurines that are the cute animals, and there's all these signs in there that are like, this distorts the word of God, and hell threats, and there's literally a plaque on one side that is like a little snake, which is Satan, because he's talking in first person. He's like, if I can get you, or if I can convince you that Noah's Ark isn't real, then I can get you to doubt heaven and hell. And it's just very menacing. But there was also this huge plaque on the other side of the room that in all like big bold letters says, and everyone died except 8 people. And there was this mom who came in with her stroller and looked at her little 4 or 5-year-old. She had a few kids. And she was like, and look, kids, it says, and everyone died except 8 people. And it was this like tone that's your typical mom voice. And she was saying it like it was this fun fact and this fun story, because look, there's a happy ending because Noah was spared and God had mercy, and look how good God is that he spared Noah. But I'm like, but everyone else died. And even in the ark there were, I appreciated the graphic nature that they decided to take on some of it to show how actually horrific the story was. I mean, their explanation was that humans were so evil that they deserved this torture and this mass genocide. But I took it as, this does not portray God as good at all. But there was this one giant painting of like this flood coming through a city, and it kind of looked like an amphitheater. So the water was coming in from the top, and you had literally women and babies, like children, like well painted, falling to their death. And I was like, yeah, God, everyone today, like a lot of the conservative Christian right is like, save the children, save the babies, and then they're, they literally believe in the story of their own, of the God they worship, killing babies.
And I saw the same mom talking to her kid, and I was like, you could see, I felt like in the kid's eyes, he had this sense of like, is this real? Like that hint of doubt that Andrew had mentioned, and that we've all kind of mentioned we might have had at one point. And then, I think when I had that hint of doubt when I was a kid, I thought, okay, well, maybe it was a few hundred people, maybe a few thousand people. But you walk 5 minutes further, and Ken Hamm says that 147 million people died by his math. That is just a next level of traumatizing that the kid is going through, because I didn't have that. It was like I was told the story and everyone died, and I could kind of write it off to like maybe it's just a few people. But yeah, 147 million people is what Ken Hamm says died in the flood, and those kids were getting all of it in one day, and I don't know how they could be thinking. Ugh.
And also, I don't know about y'all, but I was taught about the age of innocence? The age of accountability?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Age of accountability.
Yeah. Children up to a certain age are innocent, and that if they were to die, they would automatically, go to heaven. That they're basically blameless because they're just not old enough to know better. And yet here's God still killing all these babies that, who in the Genesis account says that the reason was because they were all evil and sinful. But I don't see how you could say that about the babies that were also killed in the flood.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like it's all coming back to me now. But I think about too, like how these stories were like couched in between stories of like, but God loves you and God never changes, and God, so it's like the innocent child mind trying to take all of this stuff in of like God kills his own son. Abraham is, about to kill his own son. We've got Job, we've got Noah, we've got this, and then God loves you. And also God doesn't change. And like, so talk about like the fear that is just like living in you that you would have no way to articulate, but to go, you could kill me and you love me and you don't change. How do I even organize that in my mind? And I feel like that experience was that, like trying to organize these very polarizing quote unquote facts, but they're all true.
Right.
And you can't do it in your own head. So as we've said, you look around, you see everyone else, and pretty soon your job is to conform, and you're just like, I have to believe what everyone else does, and even if I don't get it, I have to act like I get it. And that's not a healthy way for a kid to grow up.
Well,
or anyone to grow up.
And another belief in that same mindset is that God, did all these things, but also God loves you. But also if you don't accept that love and love God back, then you also deserve to be, to be in that flood or to go to hell and be tortured for all of eternity. So that's like God does love me, but I have to accept that love, or I deserve to be punished by God. But he loves me, and that's his way of loving me. It doesn't actually make sense.
Yeah, I get it.
That was, I mentioned starting my counseling program 10 years ago, and as I was working with folks and just doing all the things you do in grad school, it was just amazing, like that right there, recognizing literally like the criteria of what makes up like narcissistic abuse in a relationship is exactly what the God of the Old Testament literally did time and again. Like those narratives that we were taught. That was another reason. I mean, that was just one other thing that just really led to my own journey and where I am now. So, yeah.
And there are ways that you can read the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible that's not problematic. If you're reading it as like these stories and these metaphors that tell about the human understanding of God, like that's fine. Like you can learn a lot of stuff from that, but it's specifically the literal interpretation of it that is super harmful.
Which I think kind of leads to another kind of discussion, but like, okay, so there's this literalness, right, of like how we're supposed to view God. But then there's also this extreme liberty that is taken in the Ark experience, in the Ark encounter. And yeah, just with the types of animals that were on the boat, to what would have happened, to where they would have been placed on the boat, to, food and living quarters, and so much liberty taken. And I'm just curious to know from people, like, share, paint a picture. Let's paint a picture for those people who have not had the fortune of going to the Ark.
Well, one thing that I thought was an interesting cop out. Well, so they say there throughout the whole thing, like at the very beginning when you walk in, they say, we took creative license for this because the Bible does. So they admit that. But then as you're walking through, it definitely reads as if it's true.
Oh, yeah.
Like they even made up names for Noah's sons' wives because they don't have names in the Bible. They literally have like the coffee shop named after one of the wives. And it's just like, they act like it's they admit it, but they also don't. It is this weird thing. But
well, because they don't tell like where they took creative license and what the biblical story actually is. I think that's the confusing part, is like, unless you walk in there knowing here's exactly what the Bible says, because you've done your homework. They don't cite biblical passages on anything. They don't say like, oh, no, or, like Genesis 5:1 says this, and then verse 2 says, like, so you're also left going, what was the creative license and what was actually in the Bible?
Right. Well, I think I saw a few Bible verses every once in a while, but they would always be like, and this is how you're supposed to interpret that. Right. Like the biblical truth of this is this. And then underneath would be a plaque of like, some skeptics might say you could interpret it like this, but they're fools. And it was just very condescending throughout the whole thing. But the thing that I thought was the most interesting was that the Bible says two of every creature. And then later on in the Genesis story, it says every kinds of animals. And Ken Hamm, they take that as like, Noah didn't have to have every single type of bear on the ark. He just had to have 2 bears, a male and a female. It didn't matter what kind of bear, and that from those 2 bears, all the other bears came later. Yeah. And I just thought that was creative liberties.
Yeah, I mean, the majority, and that was exactly what it said. And the majority of animals weren't animals. I was shocked that the majority of animals that you saw were not animals that exist today. They were like, oh, this is what a very old ancestor of this animal could have been. And from this animal, you get sloths and foxes. And you're just like, wait, what? All of these came from this thing? And that was the most fascinating thing to me, because I was expecting to see like animals I recognized, and instead the logic of Ken Hamm is that you just have the kind of early ancestors, and through microevolution basically you get all the different animals we have today. But his microevolution happens really fast because he believes the world's only 6,000 years old. But he also has huge slides that explains how he doesn't believe in evolution. He just believes in.
He said he didn't believe. There was a plaque that said that they did not believe in evolution, like cross-species evolution. They were like, a snake can't turn into a penguin, or like something that no one would say happens anyway. But they were like, we don't believe in that, but we believe in. Anyway.
Yeah, like adaptation.
Yes.
It's so much. Yeah. There's so many mental gymnastics happening. It was astounding. I did, because I was so shocked too about, like, I was expecting to see, like giraffes and elephants and crocodiles, and nothing. It's all stuff that was like things that the creatures that I guess we know they existed from the record, the fossil record, but not. Yeah, it was like ancestors of animals, and it was so interesting because it's one of those arguments that I don't think that they would have gone that route, except that what's also being admitted is that Ken Hamm is like, if there was pairs of every animal, you're right, there would not be room. So we had to make it make sense. We had to condense and consolidate. And so this is now the theory that they are using to make it make sense, but now they're also making a case for microevolution. And it's like, okay, it was astounding. Because I think
they had to have those ancient they had to have the ancient animals too to fit it all into their 6,000-year-old Earth existence.
Exactly.
Yeah. And they still, and correct me if I'm wrong, did they actually explain then how the animals got to all the different continents? Because I don't feel like they actually ever did that.
I don't remember seeing an explanation. I think they were just like, because back then I don't remember an explanation.
I will say, y'all, we went through so much. And I mean, I bet it's somewhere on some little plaque in a corner. And it just says, this is how it was and why. And I'm like, but I mean, like, it doesn't give evidence. Like, I think what y'all said is great. And it's because like the whole thing is there because it had to be there and had to be explained that way because it was using this really old passage of the Bible first. I think something that was said that the day of that has really just stuck with me and played a lot more than the day was hearing Ken Hamm speak. And because I'm walking through the Ark and I'm thinking to myself, like, what is this? This is such an odd, weird place. What is this? Hearing him speak to us and him talking about in the 70s and 80s how he'd travel around. I don't know if y'all remember this story. He's like, I traveled around and I talked with all sorts of people and all these academics and educated people were like, I can't believe what you're saying because the Bible isn't literal, because how could God have done Noah's Ark? How could that be possible? And it seemed to really bother him that he was being shut down over this idea of Noah's Ark. And so it's almost like 30 years later, he's like, all right, well, I'm going to get $100 million and I'm going to show all those academics exactly how it's done. It's almost like he did it as a way to like get back. Like his own narcissism couldn't handle being shut out. And so he built it all. But then it's almost like in the process, and the investors are like, but how are we going to make money? No one wants just to read a bunch of things about science. And he's like, well, you can do some theme parky things to it. Add a zip line, add a VR experience, make the like, it's almost like then the Disney side got in. But really, at its core, I really think it's just one guy that wanted to win an argument. And he thought this was the way he had to do it. And so that's why it creates this super weird of like science explaining everything, but also attractive enough that families want to go and pay $5 for a bottle of water while they walk around and, look at all the scenes. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good way to segue into the overwhelming joy that we felt when we got there and saw on the daily program that the infamous Ken Hamm was going to be speaking live that day. And we still aren't sure if he speaks live there every day. Like, does he perhaps live on the Ark? Because I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities. There was some areas of the Ark that we were not allowed into, and that could be where Ken Hamm lives, like just thinking out new animals to, put into the cages and whatnot. But nevertheless, he was there, and we obviously went to whatever that was, his talk.
What was his talk called? Do you remember? Something about culture and Christianity,
in society, or something.
It was supposed to be. I think we were drawn to it because I think it was something like politically and culturally and having to potentially do with white Christian nationalism, and we were like, we should go. And do y'all think it was about that?
Well, Ken Hamm opened his speech by playing videos of Kamala Harris.
True.
And mocked her and said, I think the quote was, she wants to kill as many humans as possible. Because he was talking about abortion.
Yeah, and he said, we don't tell you to vote for her, but then showed us clips of Kamala. I was like, you can't vote for that, right? Basically, over and over and over again.
Said pure evil, I believe he said.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's definitely political. And then he got into the conversation on, honestly, he talked about the Genesis 1 through 11 and how it's the foundation for everything, and you have to believe this literal exact thing or else everything else crumbles in your entire faith. And then he somehow went from that to being like, just look at today and look at the way LGBTQ people say that life should be. And it was very much about gender and LGBTQ people. And at a certain point, I was like, April, I'm leaving. So I tried to walk out, but I also wanted to hear what he had to say. And so I kind of floated near the back. But yeah, it got very political and very kind of culture war of today, to the point that he showed graphics of little castles with flags sticking out the top with current issues. And one was like the worldview and the other one was like biblical worldview. And they were shooting cannons at each other. So definitely part of cultural
It's
war.
also very arrogant too, because and even throughout the entire arc and in his presentation, they kept saying that really there's only two worldviews in the whole world. Right. There is the secular and the biblical. And that, like, he totally discounted the fact that even people who do believe the Bible, that there's a lot of differing opinions just from Christians. And there's a lot of different worldviews outside of the Bible too. But he just summed it all up and like, no, there's two worldviews. You're either on the side of truth, which is what I believe, or you're on the side of Satan.
Yeah, because he even said, he's like, there's man's word and there's God's word. And then with the secular side, he would even say, he's like, I don't even like the word secular. It's anti-God. There's God and then there's anti-God. And it's like everything everything is a fight. It's like you can't just have folks who can like believe these other things. Like if they don't believe exactly as we do, they are literally the enemy and they are defaming God's character, and we need to do everything we can to resist them.
Yeah, it was infuriating. That part was infuriating. And yeah, Beecher, I was thinking about you a lot just because I knew you were kind of back and forth or whatever. And I wish I would have asked the people sitting directly in front of us how they liked mine and April's commentary throughout the talk. Because for those of you who didn't get to see us, which is everybody, right? We definitely sat in the back row. We did not sit in the front row. We sat in the back, as all good Sunday School Dropouts do. And I mean, Ken asked for participation. Conveniently, he gave the answer of what everybody was supposed to say in response to his crowd questions. And yeah, April and I did not answer correctly. I don't know. We answered things like science and biology, and
And I think one time he was like, he said the answer to all of life's questions can be found in Genesis. It was like 5 or 6 chapters,
1 through 11.
Whoa, Genesis 1 through 11. Yeah. So that was the answer everyone was supposed to say. And like the very first time he was like, where do we find the answer on sex and biology? And I think Laura and we both yelled science. And then everyone else was like Genesis 1 through 11.
Totally unprompted. We didn't it was like in unison. I was really impressed with us. We didn't even collaborate beforehand.
And even on one of the Kamala videos he played, she said something about, we trust women to make decisions for their own bodies. And you and I in unison also said, yes, we do. I'm surprised people didn't do like half turns at us, because I was very distraught at how many women especially, but a lot of people were shouting amen and nodding along and like shaking their heads when he talked about how evil the world is. And really he brought up queer people the most.
All the time.
Yeah. It was, and I was just thinking about the kids in there. There were lots of kids, there were teenagers, and percentage wise, some of them were queer. And my heart went out to them. And obviously Beecher sitting next to me too, of just like how scared they had to have been feeling all the time to know there's something about them that feels off. And you have this white Australian man at the front saying that their existence or whatever they're trying to quote unquote fight on the inside is pure evil and is destroying the world.
Yeah, it was saying don't trust yourself. And that's what the messaging that I was told over and over again. And the part I did actually just step outside was when he was basically saying, if you feel like you're LGBTQ at all, he didn't say it this way, but basically, don't trust yourself. We're fallen, and that's Satan. And I told myself that for years and years. And I looked around and I saw how many kids were in that room, and I was, that was tough because I wanted to do something. Sitting there and just kind of, I couldn't sit there and just laugh at the ridiculous anymore because it is doing real harm to kids' lives. And two, his whole point at the end was basically, we're in this culture war. If you want to win this culture war, you need to buy all of my books on your way out and give it to your kids and make sure it's the only thing your kids have access to. And that is so dark and so scary and so grifty because he's also charging an arm and a leg for these books. And the gift shop is right there as you exit. And so the whole thing is making him profit and keeping kids in cages. And it was very, very, very disturbing towards the end of that talk.
Yeah. I think that, now, again, because we're on the outside of it and not in it, I absolutely, saw all of this from a very different perspective, of course. But it made me, it just made me realize, like, how I think that 20 years ago, I would have heard that talk and maybe thought he was kind of a quirky, old, eccentric, maybe even a little judgmental man up there, talking about these things. But I would have been like, but generally, he's pretty right, and I would not have seen a problem with most of what he was saying. And I think I had like a brief moment where, and I've done this before, where it's like you're kind of entering into that space where you're going to go back into the biblical world, quote unquote, worldview or whatever. And you're like, oh my gosh, am I going to end up like falling back into that? Or is this person going to make so much sense that my heart is going to be convicted and God's got a hold of me now, or, whatever. And no, like that didn't happen. And I think for me, it was nice to see like, okay, I really have put a lot of thought into like where I'm at right now. And it just made me really sad for how shut off to yourself you have to be in those spaces, because there was just so much that was logically just unfathomable of what he was talking about. And just like also hinging on issues that were, he really views Noah's Ark as like a gospel salvation issue. If you do not believe in that in the way that he is preaching it, your salvation is in question. And I'm just like, it just feels so incompatible with a God of love. And I just felt like over and over, everything that he said was incompatible with a God of love.
Yeah.
And he'd been preaching this, basically, from what he said, this same message, I imagine, with sex and gender focused a little less, but the same message since the 70s. And so, yes, it's dangerous and it's problematic. But it's also sad. Imagine being your entire, for 50 years of your life, you are going out and preaching the same thing. You're not willing to learn anything new, because if you do, you're going to lose everything. And so all you're doing is just keeping your world as small as possible for 50 years and banging the same drum and trying to feel better about it and convince other people to believe the exact same rigid, small-minded way.
And one of his points too, he had literally had a whole slide that was just gender and how there's only two, male and female. And he even admitted from the stage, he's like, and yeah, I know some people are like, well, some people can be born both and they're born intersex, but that is such a small percentage that it doesn't even matter. And then he went on to say, like, and I was just like, well, those people still exist regardless of what the percentage is. But then he said, but really at the end of the day, it's just the result of sin. Like, they always just come back to, well, yeah, maybe they're born that way, but that's just a result of sin and it's still bad. I'm like, well, then God still made them that way or didn't intervene. And now you have people that are living with something that you are deeming an abomination and worthy of hellfire. And you are admitting that they came into that to no fault of their own. And you're still saying that it's their fault, that they have to basically die to themselves, which is a huge part of their belief system too, is that we have to die to ourselves. Die to yourself, because yourself is not trustworthy. Yourself is sinful. Yourself is worthy of being tortured for all of eternity. Like, that does a number on you to not trust your own instincts. It's another reason why the church as a whole is such a huge like safety harbor for abuse. Because people learn not to trust their own instincts. And when you see a man of God or someone in leadership abusing you, whether that's sexually or emotionally or physically, you're just taught, well, I have to listen to the authority. It must be a me problem. I can't trust my own instincts. I need to pray about this. I need to go to God. I need to listen to my pastor, or it's like pastors that teach women like divorce is bad. God hates divorce. And so you have women in abusive marriages staying because their pastor says, well, it's a sin to divorce. And it's just this vicious cycle when you are taught, especially from a child, not to trust yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's so many more things I could say about this. Like as you're talking, like, oh, there's this, and then there's this, there's so much more. But for sake of time, after we went to Ken Hamm's amazing talk, we decided to go back to the Ark.
We had to finish. We had to get through all the exhibits.
Yes. And so there was a few more that we went through. I can't even remember which ones we went through afterwards, other than the Heaven's Gates Hell's Flame one. But I don't know why this continues to stick with me. Even before that one, when we got to the Ice Age, the Ice Age exhibit, which I swear they had drawings from the Ice Age Disney movie in that exhibit. Because I think that there's part of me that realized at that point is they were wanting so much to be able to say, oh, see, we thought of everything. Yes, the fossil records or these records or whatever showed this. And so here we can account for this also in our exhibits. Everything from languages, like, the Tower of Babel, and then, how obviously that's how languages were created. But then the Ice Age piece really got to me because they do believe that we had an Ice Age right after the flood. So Beecher, back to your point of like at the very beginning, we had these animals that then got killed, right? They were on the ark and then they got killed right after. I thought it was interesting that God destroyed the earth and then they might have become fruitful and multiplied. And then the Ice Age came and wiped everybody out again. Now that wasn't in the Bible, but I thought it was interesting that these were things that, according to Ken Hamm, did happen on this different timeline.
Well, God didn't like the smell of wet flesh. He liked the smell of burnt flesh, and he wanted to smell frozen flesh.
It's so weird.
So gross.
It's like there's certain things that they can't dispute based on just the scientific record and evidence that does exist. Like Ice Age being one of them. They're like, okay, we can't really get around the fact that this did happen and that people can prove it happened. So how can we fit it into our narrative to make it make sense? Same with like all the animals fitting on the ark. It's like we're gonna have to like conform and twist.
Or that humans were roaming the earth with dinosaurs.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, there's just so many examples of them doing that. Because it was so, like, why did they need to bring up the Ice Age at all? They didn't.
Well, and a lot of times they would bring up questions from skeptics, too. Like, well, some skeptics might say, how could a polar bear been on the ark? Because they need cold climate. And instead of answering that question, they just said, well, this is a bad question because... Like they just attacked the question. They didn't actually provide a lot of answers because I think they had to know that they don't have a lot of the answers, despite Ken Hamm's main ministry being called Answers in Genesis.
Right when you walked in, Andrew and I got caught at the one that said, like, how did freshwater fish survive if the whole world was flooded with salt water? And his explanation was some scientists say that when you have that much water, you can have pockets of fresh water and salt water. And I'm just like,
Which
that was it.
scientists?
That was the whole, right, what scientists? And also I feel like we could like do a test and test that. Like, let's get some salt water and fresh water and let's see how long pockets of fresh water last. Like, just get a big tank. Like, you can test this. And they didn't want to test it. They just want to be like, that's the way it happened? Because some scientists say it might be so. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if Ken Hamm calls himself a scientist and he is the some scientist.
And he probably like knights his friends and calls them scientists also if they go through his Bible courses.
It was so weird.
Yeah.
We were that conversation about the water and stuff. I remember having that, and I remember remarking how, like a lot of folks who take this literal story, it's like they take something that might hypothetically be probable and then assume that it's likely. Like probability and likelihood, it's like that's not the same thing. Just because something theoretically could happen does not mean that it's statistically likely at all. But not surprisingly, that logic showed up a lot from beginning to end at the Ark Encounter.
Yeah. And the need for redemption and the sinner's prayer.
Yes.
And there's definitely references to hell on and off throughout the whole thing, including the Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames, which it was not called that. That's what we called it because it had the same vibes, but it's basically the very top level. There's this giant walkthrough that has kind of this comic book style story on the walls. And it starts off with an atheist professor basically kind of deconstructing or questioning the existence of God. And then this one girl starts questioning God. And then she goes through some terrible things, including like her dad dying. And then she gets in a car wreck. And I didn't fully understand if she died or whatever, but she was given the opportunity to say the sinner's prayer. And then suddenly she was in heaven, like hugging her father and then hugging God. And it was like, basically, this could be you if,
If you don't believe in the Noah's Ark.
Yeah. Well, you would go to hell, the other place. Yeah. But yeah.
That's true.
Fun times.
It's so ridiculous because like the implication with that was, well, had you, your life may have turned out a little better had you believed in God and believed in Genesis 1-11, for example. But then it's like
if you
also
had listened to Ken Hamm's books and had gone to college.
Yeah, but then you keep reading Genesis, but it's also like you could also be doing everything right, and the story of Job could happen to you. So actually, it would probably happen either way. So I don't know that it matters whether you believe or don't believe. Yeah, because either way, it's like God will inflict suffering.
Does not change.
Yeah.
Yeah, God will inflict suffering because God does not change. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Yeah. All right, so
you mentioned Tower of Babel, and there's rumors that he might be trying to build a Tower of Babel next in Kentucky. He's making so much money with the Ark. But I just want to say, I really hope Ken Hamm keeps going with this and keeps trying to prove all these Bible stories true. And I know I said this to all y'all, but I just love the idea of him doing a science experiment and trying to have somebody live inside a whale for 3 days like Jonah.
Yes.
That's what I want. I want the Jonah experience. How did Jonah make it 3 days in there? And I want you to put a live human in there and, give anesthesia to a whale, put it to sleep, big tank, we can monitor it, give him food, however you want to do it. I just want to see a human come out after 3 days, and I really hope Ken Hamm gets on that. So if you're listening, anyone out there for Answers in Genesis, that's the story I want you to prove is true next.
I mean, I think Ken should be the first one to try out the whale encounter.
And live stream it like a GoPro from inside.
Exactly.
It's like the Truman Show, but in the whale.
Yeah. Well, okay, as we start to close out, I'm curious to know any other final thoughts or takeaways from our time. Are you wanting to go back? Are you wanting to go to the Creation Museum, which I thought was like just next door, but apparently is like 45 minutes away?
Yeah, and they sell combo tickets. That is not close at all.
Not at all.
No, I do not want to go back to the Ark. I would say they did have a little zoo that you could kind of walk through. Those animals looked extra sad, and I don't know if that was really projecting onto them or if they actually were. But yeah, I would say it was basically just you paying to go and be indoctrinated, and 0 out of 10, don't recommend.
All right. Yeah.
After we went, I called my parents at some point, and they were like, my mom had apparently been a few years ago, and she thankfully had some issues with, not as many as us, but had some issues with it as well. But she was like, well, what did the kids think? And I was like, oh no, I did not take the kids. And so I think my takeaway is I think for adults that have deconstructed, you shouldn't give your money to them. But we can handle it and we can filter through things. Those kids can't, and I just think it's dangerous. And the amount of families and kids there, and parents who are reading the Bible story to their kids, and the workers who were witnessing to the kids. I saw several workers witnessing to different people that were there. And we found out later that everyone that works there has to sign a pledge of faith, and they have to like, so it very much is indoctrinating, pushing a message, manipulative and harmful. So don't take your kids. But yeah, I mean, I guess if you get a free ticket and you're an adult and you want to go laugh and have a wild emotional experience, I guess I'm okay with it.
Yeah. All right, Andrew, what do you think?
Oh man, I would not go back. That being said, for me personally, it was weirdly a cathartic experience. Not that I enjoyed the experience itself, but just realizing, oh shit, I have grown so much, and where I am now to then go back into this place. And there's certainly aspects that were triggering, but just, you know, knowing where I was 10 years ago, especially knowing where I was 20 years ago, and then where I am now, it's like, okay, damn, like it was surreal. It was actually surreal. That's a very good word, I think, to being there. It almost felt like walking through it where I'm like thinking to myself, like, is this real life? Did I really do this? I guess I did, because, well, I know I did. But so in that regard, like it was, I appreciated the experience. I would not go back now that I have had the experience.
Same.
Yeah, I agree. I would also not go back. I started noticing this when we were in the Ark the first time. I started to notice a sense of heaviness that I felt just like on a physiological level. And when we walked outside, I noticed it started to dissipate. And then obviously with Ken Hamm, like he's just other level. And then when we walked back into the Ark and, you know, finished going through everything, I noticed that same sense of heaviness again. And I just can't help but think like that probably is pretty reflective of how I felt all the time when I was heavily indoctrinated, which makes me really sad, because that's not a way to live, in that fear, in that heaviness, in that indoctrination. And it was so good to be able to drive away, and it was good to like take a beat afterwards, you know, go get dinner and just be like, we all just experienced this thing. We're not quite sure what all it means yet, but like we are not there. Like that is not part of our current living experience as we're navigating through the world, which felt really good. But it felt necessary to be able to drive away from that and say that is not part of who I am anymore, because it was a lot.
Yeah. If anything, too, it kind of was a good reminder, because I think sometimes when I think about my upbringing and my past and the things that I used to believe, it almost feels like a fever dream, because I've lived in this, you know, freedom for so long. I mean, and Beecher and I, we still identify Christian, but just not that. But also it was just kind of this reminder of like the importance of the work that, you know, we all do, and in like speaking out about how oppressive that ideology is and how mainstream these harmful beliefs are in American evangelicalism and American Christianity. And that, you know, my heart went out to a lot of the people that were there, that you don't know you're in an oppressive system really until you're out of it. Like you're not really fully able to understand how oppressive it is until you leave it behind. Like you can sense it, but it's not like you don't realize how heavy the weight of the world is until you've let it, like you've dropped it and you've actually been able to walk without it. And so, you know, it's just kind of I don't know, just kind of helped refocus, like, okay, no, like there's a reason that we call out this Christian nationalism and all this stuff, because there is a better way, whether, you know, you deconstruct and leave the faith, or you deconstruct to find a more inclusive and healthier faith. Like there is a better way.
Yeah. I like preach. I think that's so true. That's so true. I was just personally very glad that all of us went together, that none of us had to do it by ourselves, and we at least had each other for like moments of levity and you know, side eyes and like, what is this type of thing, because I know we were not in the majority in terms of like how we were viewing that experience. So I do have to say I'm very grateful that all of you came with, and you know, I think despite everything that was going on, it was as enjoyable as it could have been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do have to clarify, I would go back only if I got a free ticket from a church, because they do give free tickets to churches. You can get progressive churches to get free tickets. Apparently, that's what someone told me. And I would go with the intention of, I'm okay if I get kicked out.
Which we have a friend that used to live by the Ark, and apparently they kick people out quite regularly. So it's not hard
Like
to be kicked out.
I would go to that Ken Hamm talk, maybe on like a little bit of a gummy, just to calm my nerves a little, and sit closer to the front and shout truth to power. That's what I'd like to say, but you know.
I honestly thought the same thing, April. I was like, what would have happened if we would have actually just said it even louder or stood up and said the exact same things that we said? I thought about
Andrew
that.
and I would have finished the Ark and told you about it. Y'all
yeah, probably.
Lauren and I were getting heated. We were like, you could see the steam coming out of our ears in that talk.
And I'm not sure that Andrew with his tattoos and me with my long hair and piercings. I mean, we probably would have been kicked out too. It wasn't us, it was them. Sure, tattoo people.
Exactly. Oh, it's so good. Well, I'm glad that everybody could do it together, despite our misgivings about the Ark. And if April, if you get any free tickets, let me know. I'll join you, and we can sit front row with old Kenny.
Sounds good.
Okay, Andrew. Swords ready?
Swords ready.
All right. Did you have sword drills when you were growing up?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we did.
Okay.
I feel like, at least in my little pocket of Adventism that I grew up in, we called it something else. But yes, I mean, same thing. We absolutely did it. It was a very common thing that we did growing up in the church.
Yes, me too. So I thought we should do our own version of a sword drill. No, we are not going to be naming passages in Scripture and looking them up and reading them, because we're not. Like, we're Sunday School Dropouts, right? But we did think it could be fun to quiz each other a little bit on some crazy, wacky Bible trivia. And I'm excited to see how well we do, how much we remember, and how much we don't remember. That's probably the case for me. So, Andrew, you've got the first question. Let me have it.
Yeah, absolutely. In some ways, this could be, instead of sword drills, this could be like the evangelical version of Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader, I suppose. But
yeah, seriously, that's what it is. That's what it is, yeah.
All right. So, are you ready for the first question?
I'm ready. I need a buzzer to tap in.
All right. So in Genesis, there is an account of God bringing a flood to cleanse the earth of the evil that had consumed it. This is very relevant to our episode.
Yeah.
After the waters subsided, what did God give as a sign that he would not destroy the earth again in such a manner?
Well, I only know this because they showed this at the Ark. You know, as we walked into the Ark, there was a giant rainbow that we walked through. And contrary to what we thought, that maybe they were just LGBTQ friendly, indeed, it was not that they were friendly towards the LGBTQ community. Definitely not. But it was to show us of God's promise that he wouldn't do that again. Now, I feel like it's worth noting that God said he would just not flood the earth again. And if God is the same today, yesterday, forever, there is no telling what kind of destructions he might bring.
Yeah, it's so funny because when I was a kid, I just always thought it was like he will never destroy the earth again. But then, as I got older, and I realized, no, he just said he wouldn't flood it again.
Yeah.
Burning
which
the
is
whole
very
thing.
Disconcerting.
Burning, like the clause only says flooding. He's like, I can still burn you guys.
Yeah.
So, which is of course what I grew up being told would happen in the end times. So,
right. So he's gonna do it anyways.
Yeah. Little technicalities. He's like,
Yay.
I'm not actually in breach of contract here, guys. I only said I wouldn't flood it. So, yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
I was a teenager when I think realized that, or maybe even younger. I might have been 10 or 11 actually when I realized that one.
Yeah, no more floods, but burning is not out of the picture. It's coming for us, y'all.
It is not.
Okay, according to Genesis 3:9-10, what naked person heard God's voice in the garden and was afraid?
I believe that was
So you got a 50-50 choice here.
Well,
yeah.
right. There were only two people. I just remember from the
Yes.
story that God came to Adam, and then Adam threw Eve under the bus, is what I remember. So I think he was the one. He was the one who first heard God and was afraid. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And, that's the curse of Eve, and all women then came from that. Pain and childbearing and wanting to dominate over men. That's why men have to now dominate over us, because Adam and Eve.
It all goes back. It all goes back to the Garden of Eden.
All goes back. Praise be.
Or let's see, all back to Genesis 1-11. Ken Hamm would be proud that I remembered that.
Oh, yeah.
Genesis 1-11,
my gosh.
guys. Genesis
Yeah,
1-11.
Ken Hamm would be so proud of you right now. So proud. We'll have to send him this episode.
Truthfully, that's all I remembered from his talk, was everything was about Genesis 1-11. But all right,
it's true. Everything is,
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're still in Genesis, but this does take us out of the Garden of Eden. What man saw angels ascending and descending a ladder to heaven while he was camped at Bethel?
Okay, the latter part. For a second there, I was like, I don't think I know this. Is it Jacob?
It is indeed. Yes.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I don't think I would have gotten that. If the latter part hadn't been said, I would have had literally no idea. I just remember Jacob's ladder. That's all I remember.
Yeah. It's so interesting. That was one of those stories where I remember I've known that reference, the story, like my entire life, but that is because of that song, that hymn, that old hymn. I guess it's just called Jacob's Ladder. Anyway, it's like one of those. I don't even think it's an Adventist song, but that song in particular, for whatever reason, is very much appreciated at like old Adventist camp meetings. And so, like, I don't know, I have very early memories of hearing that very specific song, and so
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I have one, and I don't know if you're going to get this. This is a hard one because I would have had no idea. But in the Hebrew Bible, as well as the Old Testament and New Testament of the Christian Bible, only one woman who had leprosy is named. Who is she?
Only one woman.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, I feel like I should know this though, but yeah, they.
I didn't remember this.
Okay, I think this one has me stumped. Maybe I don't remember.
Wow, I did not also realize how racist this was. Okay, the answer is Miriam, who is Moses' sister. And it says, Miriam was once afflicted with leprosy by the Lord due to her grumbling about Moses because he had taken an Ethiopian wife, as per Numbers 12:1-15 in the New King James Version Bible. But in the NIV, she's described as a Cushite wife.
Oh.
And so she was afflicted with leprosy, but then ultimately cured and reinstated to the Israelite camp. Probably because she repented or something. I do not have any recollection of this.
It was interesting. I was thinking, I'm pretty sure, even though leprosy comes up somewhat commonly during Jesus' ministry, I was thinking, I don't think that's when it happened. And now that you say Miriam, I'm like, I do remember her grumbling about something.
Yeah.
I couldn't.
I remember the grumbling.
I couldn't remember if it was Moses or Aaron, but now that you say that, like, oh, I do remember that story.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I didn't remember the details. I didn't remember the details of what she was grumbling about. I
would not have either. All right. Next question.
All right. So here's one. Let's see if you know the answer to this one. Solomon had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, as per 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 3. However, only one of the women is identified by name in Scripture. Apparently that is in 1 Kings chapter 14. Who was she?
Okay. Oh, gosh. What's the first letter of her name? Let's see if I can get it.
It starts with an. It starts with an N.
N. Nancy.
Yeah, the N as in Nancy, yes, but it is not Nancy.
I mean, I feel like Nancy is such a Middle Eastern biblical times name that's the only one I can think of. Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah. So, that's interesting. As I'm reading the answer, her name is Naamah, or Naamah,
Okay.
if I perhaps am mispronouncing it. It reportedly means the beautiful. There is in fact a second woman with that same name in Scripture. That the other woman was the daughter of Lamech and Zillah. That is in Genesis chapter 4.
Ah.
So not the only
Okay.
time that name shows up, but at any rate, this is the only
I guess it was,
woman identified as being one of the wives or concubines of King Solomon. So,
okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
The more you know.
I mean, which is a lot because he had a lot of women that he was taking care of or that they were taking care of him. Let's be honest.
Oh, exactly. I mean, over 1,000 women, and only one was worthy of mentioning by name. But I mean,
yeah. I mean,
patriarchy. So
I feel like mutual sexual pleasure wasn't a thing, so they were definitely taking care of Solomon.
yes, absolutely.
Not the other way around. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Oh. Wow. Okay. I'm gonna scroll way down and find.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh. Okay. Here's a good one. Though Satan is now recognized as the adversary of God, he once held a preferred position in heaven. What type of angel was Satan?
Was he an archangel? Was he considered an archangel? I can't remember.
He was not. I do remember something in the Bible saying he was like the most beautiful angel.
Yeah, I know he was highly esteemed, and it was something, but I can't.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not remembering that.
He was a cherub angel.
Oh, a cherub.
Which, yes,
Sounds like a King
we
James
find
word.
in exactly. We find in Ezekiel that Satan actually covered or guarded the throne of God. Though the Bible says he was a perfect creation, he also had free will to choose or disobey. And Ezekiel 28:14 says, "Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so." Yeah, so he was a cherub.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew he was right up there. I bet. Yeah, that
Yeah.
and I don't remember. It's one of those things where I don't remember some of these things if I explicitly read it in the Bible or if this was somebody waxing eloquent in a Bible study.
Yeah.
Because I've heard folks say that, for example, Gabriel took his place essentially. Like what Gabriel is now is
I've
what
heard that too.
It was what Satan, Lucifer,
Yep.
whomever, what he once was,
Yeah.
and so but that's very interesting though.
You know, I think it's worth noting, and I know we definitely talked about this at the Ark Encounter in the little creation museum part. You know, Satan didn't lie. You know, he said, you're not going to die. Like, if you eat this fruit, like, you're not going to die. And he was not wrong. You know, he just said, you'll kind of know things. And again, not wrong. So I don't know, kind of revamping my view here.
Yeah, I mean, that's not wrong.
Yeah. All right, let's do a couple more. We'll each ask each other one more question.
All right, let's see. Here's a good one. A scandalous question here.
Ooh.
In 2 Samuel chapter 11, what was Bathsheba doing when David saw her for the first time from the roof of his house?
She was bathing, right? And it was like after her monthly cycle, I think. Maybe? Yeah.
She was indeed bathing. She was indeed bathing. Yep. Yep.
Okay. Yes. I feel like that's the one story that I have more kind of familiarity with, only because it was so like what we were taught it to be is so different than what it actually is, and that was one of the first time I realized dynamics of power and control, and oh yeah, this wasn't a consensual encounter. Because David was the one who saw her bathing.
Exactly. Yep. I mean, basically David was behaving as a stalker, and then went and he was king, so I mean he could do what he wanted to do, and then went about going after her basically.
Exactly.
and then getting rid of her husband, because that was obviously a problem. It's like things that they was in the original story, but like the details and then all the implications or what was actually happening, like conveniently it was just kind of whitewashed.
All right, well, here's the last question. It might seem like a trick question, but we'll see if you get it. When I was a child, my mother often used to say to me, quote, "Be sure your sin will find you out," unquote. What is the source of that statement?
Oh gosh, that is such a oft-used quote too. Like I know that quote. Now, where did it come from?
It can be just a general book if you would like.
A general book. Oh, I see. Is it Old or New Testament?
Oh, see, you're already getting it right, but it's definitely Old Testament. Because all they had here was the Holy Bible. That's where that came from. Be sure your sin will find you out. Comes from the Holy Bible. But it does come from the Old Testament.
That's really the answer to give, though. The Holy Bible. That's where it comes from?
That's really the answer, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
See, that's okay. Well, in that case.
Apparently, it is found, in Numbers 32:23 of the King James Version. This quote is used to argue that although people can often hide wrongdoing from other people, they cannot hide it from God, which is just lovely surveillance culture right there.
Oh, gosh. Yes. I mean, and then even just growing up within Adventism with the fear of the judgment
right.
Adventists have the investigative judgment where it's like happening in real time and all of those things. And that was.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes sense that it comes from Numbers, just given what all those books are about. But.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you feel like in our sword drill / are you smarter than a fifth grader, how do you feel like you stand compared to your younger self? Is it just as smart? Your younger self was smarter. Is the fifth grader smarter?
As far as knowing actual locations of where things are found in the Bible, I can guarantee you my younger self is smarter. But as far as recognizing all of the deeper implications and all of the other everything else that we're pulling from these stories and that I definitely I see things so differently now than I did even 10 years ago. But certainly more so than 20 or 25 years ago.
Yes. Absolutely, totally agree. It's possible my fifth grade self would be mortified at how long it's taken me to identify answers. So it's okay. I'll have a chat with her later.
Parts work.
Good job. I'm still going to give you a gold star. Gold star for the sword drill.
Oh, well, thank you. We only have gold stars.
Okay.
We don't want anyone to feel bad. So.
Exactly. So thank you. No participation trophies, just gold stars, and we both get them.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much also to April and Beecher for braving the Ark Encounter with us. It was a lot of fun, even though the content was heavy and sobering in a lot of ways. But we also had a good time. So I'm glad that you all were able to join us.
It was a good group to go with. Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
I think that was the saving grace of the day, is that we all had each other and we all got to meet for the first time. So that was great.
Yeah. It's so I can't believe that's the first time that we've all met in person, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I'm excited because, this is our last VBS episode, but we have season 2 coming up soon.
Yeah, this year is flying by, and yes, it is. It's very soon. I'm very excited about it, and the stuff that we have planned, the guests that we have lined up so far. I mean, just like season 1, I'm excited about it, and I really do think that folks are going to enjoy it.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I'm excited. We've been, like Andrew said, we've been lining up guests. We've got more coming. We've got, yeah, great experts, professionals, lived experiences, all talking about, various aspects of healing from religious trauma. And I am very excited for what this season is going to be. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, keep your eyes open. Until then, make sure that you head over to the Trauma Resolution Recovery website, sign up for the support groups or the course. We have those there to be a support for you. I am so excited. Andrew, anything you want to plug for your support group?
Oh, yeah. Well, so the one I'm doing, of course, is for former and deconstructing Adventists. That, of course, is my background for those of you who don't know me personally. Yeah. Like, I came out of Adventism. And so, yeah, it's really just a place for folks to connect, because I know one of the biggest things I hear from former Adventists is that it was such a lonely process leaving. Adventism is such a unique, insulated culture, even from the rest of evangelicalism. So it's like, when folks say it's not as simple as just leaving this church and then going to a different denomination, like that's really true when you're coming out of Adventism. And so anyway, all of that to say, anyone who is, questioning, has left, is thinking about leaving, just has questions that the church is not doing a good job at answering or holding space for, like that's what this group is for.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I know this is a group you've been wanting to lead for a while, so I'm really, really excited that it's happening, and I think it's just going to be awesome. It's going to be a wonderful source of support. And yeah, so if you're, former deconstructing, questioning Seventh-day Adventist, join Andrew's group, and then take a look at the website for the other groups: Purity Culture, Healing Your Inner Child, all the great things, all the things that go with healing from religious trauma. We're here to support you. I think that's it. Unless you have anything else that you want to share, Andrew?
No, I think that's it. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, looking forward to seeing everybody in season 2.
Me too. All right. With that, all God's people said,
Amen.